Hello there. Thank you for joining me today as we talk about decision making tied to our values. I'm excited to share everything that I know about how we make decisions and how they are tied to our values, but also how, if we are looking to be more liberatory based and guided organizations, how we take the power of that and use our own values to make the decisions that need to be made in order to move our organizations into a liberatory process or approach. And so I'm excited to have been a part of the C2 or Center for Third World Organizing Praxis cohort, where I served as the organizational development leadership coach and consultant. That is why I've been invited to share about how we make decisions tied to our values, and I can't wait to share with you all. So let's jump right in. My name is LaShonda Taylor, and I'm the founder and lead consultant of Strong Minds Consulting Firm. I've been doing this work for over a decade, and this work really gets me excited about where we can go and how much power we actually have in our hands. And so today we're going to start by defining decision making. We're going to have an opportunity to look at values, and then we'll also take time to look at a number of methods that will help us to think about how we incorporate our values into the decision making that we're doing for our organization in a lens that is liberatory and can allow for the freedom that we design. So, next, I want us to talk about defining decision making. The process of making choices is part of it, but let's talk more about the process of making choices by identifying a decision. That usually comes from gathering information. So taking what it is that we know and applying that so that we can make an ultimate decision. And then thinking about how we assess alternative resolutions. There are times when there aren't only one decision to be made, or there isn't only one resolution, but that there may be multiple resolutions to getting to our final decision. And that's okay, because when you're having and working from a liberatory lens, you get to work in freedom, not in the traditional form that we're used to working in, where decisions are made either from the top down or don't include community input or may not include employee input. We get the opportunity to think about how we gather the information, how we identify a decision, and how we assess those alternative resolutions. Now I want to move us into defining values. Values are essentially what we care about. So things like our wants. We care about what we want because we want it. The things that we need, we care about those equally as much because those are the things that we typically need to survive, or we feel like we need in our life to enhance our lives, or we feel that they are an important part of what we need to get to a certain point or to move in a particular direction, but we care about the need. It's our likes, the things that we like a lot, whatever that might be. And then it's also things that we might dislike. And those are the things that we care about. So that's a part of defining our values. But wait, there's more. There are a lot of types of values. It's an exhaustive list that I did not include here. What I included here were the ones that are most relevant for the conversation that we're going to have during this workshop. The first one is personal, which has to do with how you differentiate between good and bad in your community, culture, or society. So for example, if you live in a community and you're doing a community cleanup day, that probably aligns with your values in a good way. Or if you're feeding the homeless, again, that would likely connect to your values, your personal values, in a positive way or in a good way. But what might connect to your personal values in a negative way is if you hear about break-ins in cars, or if you're recognizing that the homeless aren't getting the services that they need in order to move off the streets. Those are some of the types of values that are personal, the good and the bad. The next is situational. It's kind of about what's best in the moment. And it oftentimes is what's best for the person who's making the decision. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're driving on the freeway and you and another car are going really fast on the freeway. But the other car is going a tad bit faster than you and maybe driving in what you deem to be a little more reckless than what you're doing. And you both get pulled over by law enforcement for speeding at the same time. Your situational value would likely have you believing that the other person is more wrong than you are because they were driving more recklessly or because they may have been going a tad bit faster than you. And because it's situational, I'm sure you can see that even though we're both participating in behaviors that aren't safe and that are not okay, I'm using my driving a little less fast than the other car and a little less recklessly for me to use my value, my situational value, to say, I don't think I was as bad as the other person, when in fact, we both were wrong. The final one that we're going to be talking about is our professional value. And those are values that are adapted in the workplace. So those kind of values would include things like we prioritize wellness. We think it's important to take care of ourselves. We need vacations across the board. Those are some of the professional values, the types of values that we would incorporate in our professional values. But I want us to delve more deeply and to start to think about what are the various ways that we can work through making a decision and how our values are actually tied into that. So let's start with creating a frame for decision making. We'll talk first about how to make the frame, and then we'll talk more deeply about a particular incident using an example that would help us to break this down. So we're going to go through a couple of ways of thinking about how to make our decisions, starting first with creating a frame for decision making. So the first thing to think about is the purpose. What do we hope to accomplish? What do we want to get from this? Do we want this to end in a positive way? Just what are we hoping that will come of this? So the purpose for our decision. Then we want to think about the perspective or the point of view, the way to approach and how others might see the situation. So thinking about if we come from a place of warmth or if we come from a place of punitiveness and how that might feel for others. Remember, we're coming from a liberatory lens. And so we have the freedom to think about how we approach our decisions. Do we want to be an iron fist? Or do we want to have a soft touch? Those are things that we get to decide. They also are ways that people will see the situation. If you come with an iron fist, it is likely that employees will feel nervous or anxious. If you come with a soft touch, it is likely that they will feel supported and safe. So those are things that you want to think about, particularly because you have this liberatory lens where you're able to think more broadly about how you use your decision-making and how you frame your decision-making. The last is scope. So what do we want to include and what do we want to exclude in a decision? Everything isn't relevant. Sometimes we want to include things that are helpful, that will get us to the resolution, that will help us feel confident in that. But there are some things that are just not necessary. And we want to make sure that we're excluding those things in the decision. It'll make more sense when we delve into the example. But for now, just know that the scope is what we want to include in our decision and what we want to exclude in our decision. I hope this makes sense, but I know it will as we move forward in the process. So now let's think about the HIP method for decision making and do a HIP check before making your decision. HIP stands for how will things change on account of the decision? Will things stay the same? Will they get better? Will they get worse? How will they change on account of the decision? The second is to think about the impact. What will the impact be on me or the organization, for example, or me personally? Or what will the impact be on others, which could be other staff, other partners, the community at large? Thinking about the impact when you're making your decisions is also crucial. And finally, is this going to be a permanent decision or is this a reversible decision? Is this going to be etched in stone? Or if we see a need for change in the future, will we be able to remove and reverse the decision that we made in the past so that we can change it and it can be more effective and make a more effective decision? All of those things are important methods for decision making. The next thing I want to talk about is what are you willing to give up? Because when you're making a decision, you have to weigh the balance. And you have to know that you're going to be giving up something potentially. So there are things to think about in this particular scenario. Prioritize less important to most important. So when you're thinking about how you make a decision, you don't have to think about all of the small or less important things to most important. What you want to do is prioritize those. So if something is not of the greatest priority, then that might be something that you're willing to give up. But you want to make sure that you are landing on the most important because those are likely going to be the things that you're going to use when you're making your decision. The next is, what is the direct value? So what will be directly a result of the decision that you make? That is an extremely important question because, again, it goes back to what are you willing to give up? If the results are going to be positive, then you may feel like you're not giving up anything. But if the results are not going to be exactly what you want, and there may be some negative pieces to those results, then you are giving up something, and you need to be thinking about what that looks like. What is the indirect value? So what is the value that is going to be placed, or what are you going to have to give up? And how will it impact not just the results, but others in this process? So similar to what we talked about when you're thinking about the HIP method and what impact it'll have on you, your organization, and others, what will be the indirect value? What can be gained from that? What will we lose from that that is not apparent in our initial thoughts? Those things need to be thought about and talked about because you may end up giving up something, and you need to know what you are willing to give up. The next thing is for you to think about short term. What are the short term effects of the decision that you're making? Is it going to be lead to better long term, or is it just specifically for the short term and you'll need to reevaluate and readdress your decision? Those are things that you need to think about, because in the event that you're giving up something, and you may not have to give up something in the short term, but you may have to give up something in the long term, or vice versa. You may have to give up something in the short term to get to the long term, or you might have to give up something in the short term and the long term. But you need to know what you're willing to give up. And that's an important piece of how we do the work when we're talking about how we get to our decision making. And then we have to think about long term. What are we willing to give up in the long term to get the results that we desire now? It might be that we have to give up something in the short term. It might be that we have to give up something on the way. It might be that we have to give up something in the long term. But we need to think about those things. So I'm going to take you through a scenario, And then we're going to walk through the frame for that decision making yet again. The scenario is such. Julie services all of her clients with the utmost respect and often receives positive commendations from her clients. She's bubbly around the office and has a positive relationship with all of her colleagues. Julie, though, calls out of work at least one day a week. And it's due to her having a kindergarten student who's been ill or sometimes are having behavioral issues. The thing about Julie, though, is that she is equally as productive as her peers, sometimes even exceeding their performance. And when she is at work, she always arrives to work early and is often the last one to leave. So I guess the decision that we're going to be making here is, should she be fired because of her excess absences? Well, let's talk about that. So let's create a frame for the decision making based on the scenario that was shared. So what do we hope to accomplish? What we hope to accomplish, and I want to give you two lenses. I want to give you the traditional lens, and then I want to give you the liberatory lens. And we can talk more amongst yourselves about what those two look like. But I think it's important to think about both. So when we say, what do we hope to accomplish? In a traditional organization, it would be likely that they would want to fire the employee for absences, of course. But in a liberatory framework, in a liberatory organization, or one that's learning how to lead as such, we might want to find out the reason why. Okay, we might want to find out why Julie is experiencing these absences, because that's an important, or could be an important piece if you're looking through a liberatory lens, is not as apparent in the traditional way of thinking. Then we want to think about the point of view. So the way that we approach, or the perspective, and also how others might see the situation. So traditionally, you'd make an example out of Julie. You'd fire her, and folks around would see that if you have too many absences, you are no longer a valuable asset to the company, and as such, you get fired. But what you could do is have a more liberatory approach, which would be more gentle and coming from a more empathetic lens. So a way of seeing yourself in that situation and thinking about what you would want and need in a situation like that. And the way to approach and how others might see that situation would be just the same. If you make an example, there probably is going to bring up some anxiety and make folks feel uncomfortable. But if you're gentle with your approach, and if you come from a place of empathy, it is likely that employees will see themselves as being heard or supported, and that's equally as important. Finally, the scope. So what to include in the decision and what to exclude. So I can tell you, traditionally, people look for the facts of what's happening. The facts are, even though she's a great worker, at least once a week, she's missing out of work for whatever those reasons might be. So they usually use facts. And then what you want to exclude in decisions are assumptions. You don't want to make any assumptions like she's just lazy, or she doesn't want to come in because she doesn't want to be in traffic. It's no need to make those assumptions, but traditionally, that's what we would do. Let's think about a more liberatory lens. And so what you would want to include is the reasoning. Why is this happening? What is going on that's creating an experience for Julie where she has to take off at least once a week? The why behind that really can help us to see how we can support. And what we might want to exclude in these type of decisions are the possible resolution. because sometimes we're quick to get to the resolution, and we may need to think it out more fully. We may need to flesh it out to see if there's more than one resolution. So that's a way to create a frame for decision making for the scenario. Now I want to use the HIP method that we talked about and doing the HIP check before we make the decision. So again, I ask the question, and this is the decision we're working to make. Should she be fired because of her excess absences? What I want to think about when we're doing the HIP check is absolutely working through the H, the I, and the P. So those are important pieces. But I also want to lift up the risks that are associated with that. And again, if we're coming from a liberatory lens, knowing those risks are equally as important as doing the HIP check. But let's start, and you'll see what I mean. So how will things change on account of the decision? Well, the truth of the matter is, because we'll be rid of the employee who is averaging one missed day per week, we would be able to hire someone new. This person would likely not miss any days and may be equally or more productive. And that's what most organizations, most companies are looking for. That's the traditional way of thinking. But we're coming from a liberatory lens. And so I want us to think about the risks that are associated with that as well. So one of the risks could be that the clients have a positive relationship with Julie and they don't care for the new hire. That's one risk. And that could be a risk that could be very difficult and could create a lot of strife within the organization and outward facing from the organization. It could also be another risk would be that maybe this new person is slower than Julie. And if they're not as fast as her, then they may not be as productive as she has been. Another risk is that they don't have the same work ethic. So maybe they're not getting there early. Maybe they're not staying there late. And those are things that are really important when you're thinking about who you want to have as a team member. So when we're looking through our HIP check, we're not just looking for the H, the I, and the P, but we're also thinking about the risks that are associated. Let's move into impact. So what will the impact be on me or on the organization, or on other employees, or on the community, or the outward facing folks that we're providing services to? Well, the impact would be that productivity, if we're thinking traditionally, would probably be greater or equal. Others would feel like they're being treated equally because they may feel some kind of way about the fact that Julie is missing a day per week. They may currently feel like there's some favoritism or that she's not being receiving the punitive response that she should be receiving on account of her having absences. But again, there are risks when you think about this impact. If they have less work ethic than Julie, again, they may not be as productive. Or if the employees see you making or having an iron fist and using Julie as the example, they might have anxiety about needing to care for their own families. And they may see the firing as a positive thing. You won't know until you have an opportunity to really share, but you've got to think about all of those risks, as well as thinking about how you will make your decision using the HIP method. Let's move on. Will this decision be permanent, or is this a reversible decision? So it's pretty permanent if you fire the employee. But some of the risks of that is that, and you know this because of the market that we're in, it could take a really long time to hire a new person to replace Julie. And that is a big risk. So you might want to think about how you make a decision that could eventually be reversible. So maybe thinking about some alternative ways that you can support her absences, and the risks that are associated with that would be that at some point you'd be able to think about how you can either support or move back to a permanent decision of firing her. So let's reevaluate what would be the best decision, very much focused on a liberatory lens and thinking about the overlap of our personal and professional values. So we'll start at the beginning. How will things change on account of the decisions? Well, the thing is that if you have a sit down with Julie to review the why for her weekly call out, it may allow for you to have an opportunity to empathize. That's what would happen if you're using a more liberatory lens. And it would be an opportunity for us to think about if we have children of our own, when our child was young, or if you don't have children, maybe knowing someone who has small children and thinking about it from their lens. And it would help us to see that she actually is in a place of needing support versus a place where we would just fire her and then leave her off to or count her out as a valuable part of our team. Another liberatory approach would be to establish a work from home format so she could have the best of both worlds. So she can be home after she picks up her son, but continues to have a full workday. This is another way to have a liberatory approach to how we can change things on account of this decision that we're making. Let's move on to the impact. So what would the impact be on me as the leader or the organization, or on others who are actively a part of the organization, whether they be employees within the organization or whether it be those who we're servicing out externally in the organization. So let's look at the impact. It's likely that if we met Julie with a sit down, understood her why, and either created a work from home format or found some other way to meet her needs, that Julie would feel less stress and would work to ensure that she improved her attendance. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that would be a clear way to show how much we care by providing those adjustments that are needed, necessary in order for her to feel supported and to continue to work at her best capacity. But let's move on to P. Would it be a permanent decision, or can we think about a reversible decision? You don't have to land on the permanence of firing Julie. Instead, if you're using your liberatory lens, you can be more accommodating and get better results from your employee because they feel supported. And if the support you're providing is abused, you're able to reverse your decision and fire her. So it's kind of a win-win-win if you're using the liberatory lens to create alternative resolutions to the decision that you need to make, and then be able to move through reversible decisions. And if you have to go back to make a permanent decision, but when folks feel supported and when they know how much you care, you oftentimes don't have to find yourself in a permanent decision because they want to do what they feel they need to do in order to make sure that they are seen as a valuable asset to the company. So in this particular scenario, we also had to think about what we'd be giving up. So let's move there. What are we willing to give up? So if we start with prioritizing the less important to the most important, these are some of the things we can think about. If productivity is still high, then the absences are not as important. But if the productivity decreases significantly, then the absences are more important. So I didn't hear in that scenario where Julie had fallen behind. What I heard in that scenario is that Julie was missing a day a week and that looked a certain way may have made other employees feel a certain way, may have made her supervisor feel a certain way, but I didn't hear that there was less productivity. So there may be something to give up, but there may not be anything that we're having to give up. So then what would be the direct value? She would get to keep her job. She would feel supported by her workplace, and she continues to arrive early and stay late. So you still have an employee that's a valuable asset to your organization. That's a direct value. Let's talk about what the indirect value is. So the indirect value would be a couple of things. First, there would be increased productivity because she's still doing her work. And in fact, she may move to a place where she's able to not have to take off work and she'll be able to do even more work. So her productivity would be great. She'll likely work to not have to take days off in the future. That would be awesome because, as I just pointed out, the less days that she takes to work, take off work, the more productivity she will have. And it will likely be a boost in her morale and her commitment to the employer. It is also likely that surrounding employees, so her peers, would also see how she was treated and how the situation was handled, and it would boost their morale as well. And it would make them more committed to being a better employee. And it would do that because they would see that they too would be given the opportunity to have the level of support that Julie was given. Let's think about what we'd have to give up in the short term. So we wouldn't have her in office. She'd have a work from home option, and that would be great. It would also likely reduce her anxiety in the short term and the anxiety of those around her. But let's also think about the long term. So the truth of the matter is that at some point, this staff member's child will be getting older and will have gained an immunity that will prevent them from being ill. But they also will be more acclimated with what's expected of them, and that likely will impact their behavior as well, so that they will have less behavioral issues and they will have built up an immunity to all of the germs that exist in a kindergarten class. And so long term, we wouldn't have to worry about if those things will be happening and if she'll need those days off. Additionally, it's likely that this staff member will stay with the firm or the company or the organization for years to come. And that is, again, because they feel supported, because they feel that they have been, their situation has been met with empathy and concern and care. And that reduces staff turnover, which we all know can be a hassle, particularly at a time like this when it's really difficult to find the appropriate person to hire. You can probably think of other ways to look at this: more short term, more direct value, more indirect value, more long term. The bottom line, though, is that a process was used that was liberatory and yielded the desired results for both the employee and the employer. These are the perks of liberatory leadership that does not deter us from intersecting our personal values into our decision making. I want to share something that I think would be helpful in the future. It's a quote from Charles Kettering, and it says, "A problem well stated is a problem half solved." Remember, stating the problem already allows your value system to kick in and begin the problem solving and decision making. Also remember, though, in a liberatory organization, you get to make the rules. So use that superpower of being able to make the rules to begin solving the other half. I want to take time to have you look at a clear video that will help you to see if you are putting on your liberatory lens in your values-based decision-making, or if you're working through a traditional lens. After you watch this video, you will be able to see how you measure up. So I'm going to stop this share and move into the video. And let's see how that works so that you can make sure that you are moving into a liberatory lens and not focusing on the more traditional lens.
You know that when someone's brilliant
So let me share my screen and you'll be able to see what it is that I'm talking about when I say going back and making sure that you're using that liberatory lens. So we'll start from here. This is what value looks like. How do you measure up? Let me make this full screen so that we can fully enjoy this very short video.
You know that when someone's brilliant at their job, it's not just because of what they know, it's because of how they apply it. In the changing world of work, you'll encounter more situations that are completely new or that don't fit your current policies, processes, and rules. So how you apply what you know will be increasingly important. The professional values will help you to apply the new knowledge and behaviour standards to all those different situations and to make decisions that benefit people as well as the business. The professional values are principles-led, evidence-based, and outcomes-driven. Being principles-led means considering what you stand for as a people professional when you're making tough choices. So even when there's no obvious rule or precedent, you still have a clear purpose to guide you. Not all evidence is equal. That's why when you make decisions, you need to base them on the best evidence available, not a feeling, a fad, or selective vision. If you're evidence-based, you always have the data to support and drive your professional judgment. Finally, for work to be better for everyone, you need to balance business outcomes with people ones. That means asking yourself, what is it I want to achieve? And do those outcomes include happier employees and communities, as well as a more profitable business? These professional values will help you to make good decisions in the changing world of work. But it's when you use them together with the profession map that you'll make your biggest impact and achieve something amazing.
So it's when you'll make your biggest impact and achieve something amazing. I want to take time to go back because what I know that we learned is everything in that video. That we have to be thinking about our values, that we have to be thinking about the people's value, even in our professional way of decision making. And that is really, really important. We also have to think about the outcomes and how we meet the needs of the people who work with and for us. And so I implore you to think about using the various methods that I shared with you today. I'm going to bring up a slide that will be helpful in figuring out your way of connecting with me if you're interested in getting more information. And unfortunately, like all technology, I don't see it here. But what I will do is I will share my information. And if you are interested, I'd love to be able to meet with you, connect with you, and use that as an opportunity for us to do work together or to learn more about the liberatory lens. So I'm going to stop the share because it's not necessary to share at this moment. And if I'm able to get that back on screen, I will absolutely do that. Let's see if I'm able. And of course I am. And I am going to actually play from the final, and I'm going to escape out of this. Apologies for this delay, but it's allowing for me to have time to just share with you where we are. And this is my contact information. My name again is LaShonda Taylor, and I'm the founder and lead consultant of Strong Minds Consulting Firm. Let me put that on the screen so that you're able to see it. and use it in a way that's beneficial for you. I will play from the current slide. I have so conveniently put the barcode here so that you can scan that barcode and get all of my information if you're interested. But I've also included my email address for those of you who are more comfortable with reaching out via email for more information. There will also be a handout or a worksheet that you'll be able to work through that will show the various methods that we use. So the creating the framework for decision making, thinking about the way that we make our decisions, using the framework of what do we hope to accomplish? What are the ways that we will approach this? And what do we want to include and exclude? Also, the HIT method, so that we can think about how this will impact our decision and some of the other things that are included in the HIT method. And then, well, first and foremost, how this will change things, the impact, and then is this going to be a permanent decision, or if in fact it's going to be a something that we can work through the resolution so that it's not as permanent, so that we can see if there's some other alternatives. All of that will be included in the worksheet, and I hope you will use that to think about how you have a liberatory lens in your decision making. Thank you again for taking the time, and I know there were a few technical issues at the end, but I hope you've enjoyed the presentation, and I hope that you got something out of it. I appreciate you giving me a moment of your day to help you to have a more liberatory lens on your decision making and how it's tied to your values, and know that it's okay to bring your personal self into your organization. In fact, it's welcomed. Thank you again. Have a wonderful rest of your day. I'm stopping the share and I'm ending this workshop. Bye-bye.